over to George and let George kick it off. Okay.
Well, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you very much, Michael. Well, hello, everyone. As Michael says, I'm George Walker. I'm the current chair of SHR, the Scottish Housing Regulator, although I'll keep referring to us in our shorthand form, if that's okay, SHR, which is what we call ourselves for short. And I've been in that role since 2017, as Michael said, so my second term comes to an end at the end of June this year. And I can tell you, I've absolutely loved it. It's been a really interesting role to be involved with. In the time I've been involved, we've reviewed our regulatory framework twice and reset how we regulate. And I'll come on to talking a little bit about that in the third section, where we look at what being a board member is about. And I've also had the joy of working with a really good internal team at SHR and a senior exec team that has changed over the time I've been chair. The chief executive has been the same, but a number of other senior people have changed and joined the organisation new. So we've had some good fresh blood into the organisation, which is great. And as I've said, it's a job I really enjoy. So let me tell you a little bit about what it is that the SHR does. I suppose if I start with the technicals, we were established in April 2011, actually. So a while ago now, under the Housing Scotland Act 2010, to give it its posh name, although that act has been updated since and some tweaks to powers and authorities for the regulator have been done. And I'm having a blank moment because I can't remember when that was, but it was a few years ago now. Sorry about that. We are what's referred to as a non-ministerial department. So we are a department, if you like, of the Scottish Government, but we're an independent regulator. So we operate independently of government. And what that means in effect is that day to day, we're not accountable to Scottish ministers, but of course we have accountability, which is only right in any public body. But that accountability for us as an organisation is to the Scottish Parliament. And so myself and the Chief Executive, Michael Cameron, have to appear before the Local Government and Housing Committee at the Scottish Parliament every year and present our annual report, talk about what we've been doing, update, and of course answer any questions that the committee may have. And part of my role obviously involves me meeting not infrequently with a variety of MSPs and with the chair of that committee off committee cycle, so that we keep them up to date with everything we're doing. So that's, if you like, the statutory setup for us. But it is important that the candidates would understand that we operate independently of government. Now, that doesn't mean to say we do our own thing. We don't pay any attention to what the Scottish Government does. Of course we do. We have a very good relationship, I'd like to say, with Scottish ministers. The Housing Minister would attend our board meeting once a year. He attended last time in, I think it was our November or December board meeting when I think back, November, and he would attend regularly. The team of officials that we work with and Michael is one of that team, would support us and work with us in many regards, and we would keep a flow of information going through that team of officials in order that the minister's always up to date on what we are up to, and that we try to operate a no surprises policy so that the minister would know what's coming from us and we would know what's coming from the political world. So I think we have a good and effective relationship. It's just slightly different in that we're not directed by a minister in the way some public bodies are. And we operate under the Act that I mentioned, the 2010 Act, which gives us our powers and tells us what it is the Scottish Parliament wants us to do. So what's our statutory objective? Well, our statutory objective is to safeguard, promote and protect the interests of tenants who live in homes provided by social landlords. To give you an idea of the scale of that, there are about 600,000 tenants in social housing in Scotland, although that clearly changes and it's maybe gradually increasing a little at the moment as some new homes have been getting built, which is a good thing. We also, though, are there to protect the interests of owners who receive services from social landlords. And often these might be factored owners who perhaps own a house or a flat in a mixed tenure area. where there's social housing and there's ownership, often local authority houses that have been sold to the individual tenants, and they become owners, and they're still receiving factoring services. Now, those factoring services can come from local authorities, or they can come from what we call RSLs. I'm going to hear that acronym. And an RSL is a registered social landlord, and they are a housing association to you and me. And so there's really two providers of social housing in Scotland, one of these RSL bodies, of which there's around 170 in Scotland. And the other, of course, are the local authorities, of which there's 32. Although I should say not every local authority in Scotland now provides social housing, because a number of them have handed it off to RSLs, and so their work is handed off through a variety of RSLs. And for example, where that where that happens in the biggest scale is in Glasgow. Glasgow has no social housing. Sorry, the local authority in Glasgow, to be clear, has no social housing, and it's all done through RSLs. But as you may well know, local authorities have responsibility for a number of services to housing and social housing. And top of that pile is the provision of services to those who are or may become homeless. And they have a statutory duty to provide accommodation, often temporary accommodation, to people who become homeless. So we engage with local authorities in that regard. And so on the subject of homelessness, to give you an idea, there's around 40,000 people and their families who experience homelessness each year currently in Scotland. And sadly, those numbers have been rising. And 13 local authorities, and indeed now the Scottish Government, have declared a housing emergency from that. But that gives you an idea of the scale. 40,000 people would declare homelessness in any one year and would seek help from these local authorities that I refer to. And we would have a role in overseeing how they work and regulating that. And then the final group that we have purview of are gypsy and traveller families, because they use official sites provided by social landlords, which are dotted across Scotland. Now, official numbers I've seen talks about 355 gypsy travellers in those sites, but the reality is there are a lot more traveller families in Scotland. They're not necessarily all in these official sites that we have oversight of, run by social landlords. So that's, if you like, the remit that we have. To be clear, we have no remit at all with the private rented sector. There was some talk at one point from Scottish Government that they may like to introduce a private rented sector regulator at some point, but as it stands, that is not us, and that hasn't moved forward. So we only have responsibility for social housing. How do we go about regulating? Well, regulation, I would say, is often best done based on a benchmark. In other words, something that you can regulate against, a set of rules that you regulate against. And for us in Scotland, we're very lucky in that we have the Social Housing Charter. And the Social Housing Charter was a charter developed and laid out by Parliament. It was updated in the last 12 months. And that update, of course, involved, led by the Scottish Government, but of course involved all sorts of partners involved in social housing. And that sets out the standards for Scottish social housing in a whole host of areas. And that can be anything from tenant and resident safety through to allocations policy, and so on and so forth. There's a whole host. And if you want to understand that better, I'd encourage you to go and take a look at our website, and you would find the Scottish Housing Charter there. And so what we do is we monitor, we assess, and we report the performance of Scottish social landlords against the Social Housing Charter and against a number of other statutory responsibilities that they have. And so we're reviewing them regularly. We have the data that's provided to us regularly by social landlords, and a quite significant annual risk assessment process that looks at what we see as the significant risk setting in the sector each year. So by combining that data, by combining our risk assessment, and combining a final thing, which is an annual assurance statement, which is something in our last but one regulatory framework we made obligatory for all landlords to do, to assess themselves first and assure themselves, this is for the governing bodies, if you like, of these organisations, including local authorities, to assure themselves that they're operating in line with the Charter and all the other requirements of them, to assure themselves, then assure their tenants, and finally assure us as the regulator that they're operating in line with that, or to identify where perhaps they have gaps or areas of weakness, you might say, and to tell us as the regulator what they are doing to address that. And that annual assurance statement, which comes to us in October every year, becomes part of the risk assessment process. And that means by the time we get to this part of the year, we are busy finalising the risk assessment, analysing the annual assurance statements, and by the end of March, the 31st of March, we will publish updated regulatory plans, regulatory engagement plans for every single social landlord in Scotland, all the RSLs and all of the local authorities. So in other words, that process that I've described to you is a key part of the work that the regulator does, not the board, of course. That's done by the staff team of around 50, depending on the day you look at it, to give you a sense of the numbers. They build up to that part of the year where we publish two things. One, the engagement reports that I've mentioned, and our regulatory judgment on social landlords in Scotland, or for RSLs anyway. And that regulatory judgment can be compliant, non-compliant, or can be in, or could be in statutory intervention. And we have no statutory interventions going at the moment. So this comes back to a role of monitoring, assessing, reporting, and the legislation would say proportionately intervening with an individual landlord wherever that may be necessary. But in truth, intervening would often mean engaging with those landlords. So look at the areas of where they need to improve or they need to make adjustments, and that engagement can go on for a significant period of time. Statutory intervention, where we can take statutory action, would really be very much a last resort for the Scottish housing regulator. I'll wrap up just with this, and that is that we try to do this in a very open and transparent way. That's why we've introduced the annual assurance statements. That's why we've introduced the transparent publishing of our regulatory judgments on all landlords. That's why we've introduced the transparent publishing of the regulatory engagement plans every March, April time, as I've said. And those engagement plans explain what we're asking of any given landlord at any time. And if we're engaging with that landlord through the year and our ask of a landlord changes, then we update that plan. So we operate in a very transparent way. And we do that through working with a variety of stakeholders. That can be tenant groups, that can be landlord groups. The biggest of those is called this SFHA, the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, that you may have heard of. On the local authority side, there's ALACHO, and there's a smaller tenant organisation, but an important one based in Glasgow, called the Glasgow and West of Scotland Forum. So a whole variety of stakeholders in the sector, and including, of course, vitally, the Scottish Government as a key stakeholder in that list. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that's given you a little bit of a flavour for how we are constituted as a public body and what our work is about. And I think Kevin's going to come on now and chat a little more about the process that if you choose to enter and apply, I hope you will, if you choose to enter and apply, that you might go through. And then I think we're going to come back and I'm going to chat a little bit about what being a board member is like and what stuff the board gets involved with. So I'll stop there, Michael.
Thanks, George, and thanks, Michael, for the introductions at the start. Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Mills. I'm one of the public appointments managers in the Scottish Government. There's a number of us, and our role is to manage the process from start to finish, the appointment process. So that involves working with the board, in this case George, working with Michael from the sponsor area, and working with ministers who ultimately are responsible for making these appointments. So our role is to make sure it runs as smoothly and efficiently as possible and is a good experience for all those involved, which includes the selection panel, ministers and yourselves as applicants. As I said, these are ministerial appointments, but there is also a regulator, the Ethical Standards Commissioner, who regulates all ministerial appointments that are considered regulated. Most of the big, well-known organisations that ministers appoint to are regulated. There's a small number, probably committees, working groups, advisory committees that have got a time-limited piece. They are not regulated, but the vast majority, health boards, for Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Fiscal Commission, Futures Trust, National Investment Bank, they're all regulated, and therefore it's my job as one of the managers to make sure that their appointments process meets the Ethical Standards Commissioner's Code of Practice. In layman's terms, it's very much a good practice guide on how to recruit in an open and transparent way. But there is a regulatory part to it, and the Commissioner does monitor all of our appointments. And on some occasions, they'll add a member of their staff, one of their public appointment advisors, to the selection panel, which I have on this occasion. It's down to the Commissioner to decide if one of their advisors should be on the panel. On this occasion they have, and therefore if you get through to the interview stages, you'll meet Di, who's the advisor on this occasion. So that's a bit of the background about how it all works. As I said, my role is to manage that process from start to finish, right through from when we start in fact, prior to advertising, when the panel meet to get together, look at what the Minister's thoughts are, and then come up with the skills that are required for the role or roles we're looking to fill, how we're going to publicise those appointments, what the application process should be, what the assessment process should be at interview, and also agree on the final stages, start dates, what their formal appointment letter looks like and stuff like that. So I lead on most of that, working with colleagues like Michael and George to make sure it runs smoothly. For this round, it's already been advertised. The closing date is 10th of March at 5 p.m. So if you are considering applying, then please do so in good time. I'll cover more of this when we get to the tips bit later on. But I'll give you this tip now. Please don't leave it till like 10 to 5 the night on the day it's going to close, because many people do, and they get frantic emails at 5 to 5 saying, I can't get in the system, my password's not working. And the system we now have is an Oracle-based system. It just closes down at 5 p.m. and therefore you no longer have access to it or to the role you're looking for. So although I'll cover that later on, but I would always please don't leave it that late to try and finish everything or submit the evidence that you've been asked to submit. So on this occasion, we're looking for a chair and a member. We do have appointment rounds where we have more than we have different positions to be filled. Sometimes it's one chair, sometimes it's 5 members, but on other occasions it's one chair and one member. And as an applicant, you can apply to be the chair, you can apply to be the member, or you can apply for both. There is no restriction on that. But what you would have to do is, if you are applying, is to submit evidence as set out in the applicant information pack, which sets out what the requirements are for both roles. If you only want to go for one of those, the chair or the member, then you submit the evidence at the application stage, which allows you to demonstrate the skills, experience, knowledge you have for that role. If you're wanting to apply for both, as I said, which you can, then you would need to provide the evidence for both roles. Once all that evidence comes in, the selection panel get together and they're planning on doing that 25th of March, and they will go through all the applications that have been received, assess the evidence that has been submitted by each individual, and then decide who should be shortlisted for the final stage, the interview stage or the final assessment stage. The Commissioner's Code insists that that is the applicants who most closely meet the evidence that's been asked for. So there will be some occasions, just because the numbers involved, where you may well submit sufficient evidence, but there will be other applicants who will have provided much stronger and much more relevant evidence. And it may well be that on that occasion, somebody may lose out because their evidence, whilst meeting the minimum requirement, may not be strong enough. So please, when you're applying, take time to make sure you demonstrate the skills, knowledge, experience, etc., as well as you can. God, I'm moving at the tips, but to make sure you read the papers that are out there and make sure you demonstrate the evidence as well as you can. Now, after that, you'll be notified by us to let you know if you've been successful or not. If you're unsuccessful, you can ask for feedback. Either myself or one of my colleagues will prepare feedback based on the evidence we record at the meeting with the selection panel. We look at every applicant and evidence they submitted, and a panel makes the decision on that, and then we record that so that we've got something to give candidates if they ask for feedback. If you're invited to interview, they're on the 3rd and the 4th of April, and therefore you would be given full details of what that, how that would be set out on that day. generally speaking, although the panel will probably make final decisions near the time, generally speaking, it's an interview in some form of exercise alongside that. The panel will decide what's the best exercise for the skills they're looking to find the applicants to have. Since COVID and the fallout from COVID, all our interviews were online. However, we're now back to face-to-face interviews primarily, but we have an agreement with the Ethical Standards Commission that if a candidate, for whatever reason, is unable to come face-to-face, then we will undertake an interview on MS Teams. So if you're invited to interview and there are whatever personal issues it is that you can't make the interviews, which are in Edinburgh, then you would contact us. We would speak to the panel about trying to arrange an online interview instead. When we just as a sort of an aside, when we moved into COVID, we still continued to make appointments, but all of the interviews were done online. There was some reticence and some concern at the start, but certainly by panels that it wouldn't work as well. They wouldn't get that same relationship with the candidate over a desk as you would online. But actually, in my experience, and I've been here quite a long time, it didn't make a huge difference. And we appointed as many people who applied online as we did, who were interviewed online as we did, who came face-to-face when we started doing face-to-face interviews again. Our IT has held up really well. I think that's another concern that the IT that Scottish Government has wouldn't be appropriate, or the body has if we're using their building. But actually, it has worked out pretty well. So there have been very, very few, probably counting the fingers of one hand, how many applicants where the interview system went down on the day. And sometimes that's generally been down to their own internet at home, and something's impacted on that. So that's the interviews. Once the interviews are completed, the selection panel make recommendations to the appointing minister. And it's actually the minister who then decides who should be appointed. So Minister for Housing on this occasion, Paul McLennan, and the minister looks at all evidence put forward, looks at the recommendations made by the selection panel on who should be appointed, and then makes a decision based on that recommendation. Now, under the Code of Practice, ministers can meet the recommended candidates and have a chat with them before they make their decision. Some ministers do, some ministers don't. But ultimately, the minister will then make a decision, let our team know, let the panel know, and it falls back to our team to contact all of the applicants that have been interviewed to see whether they're successful or whether they're not successful. For the chair appointment, again, it's part of the Commissioner's Code and I think the Ministerial Code. For a chair appointment, the First Minister has to countersign or agree with the Minister's recommendation. Not for the member, but only for the chair appointment. So all chair appointments that we make, the First Minister also confirms that they are content with whatever ministerial decision has been made. So at that point, we would contact you and let you know you were successful. And if you were successful, we would then start the pre-appointment inquiries, draft up the formal appointment letter. You'd be contacted about those pre-appointment inquiries, and that's generally a Disclosure Scotland clearance and proof of identity, proof that you live in the UK, or if you don't live in the UK, you have legal status to live here or to be here. If you're unsuccessful, we would then let you know you're unsuccessful and offer you feedback, and that feedback would be collated in the same way as we did for those that were unsuccessful at shortlisting. We take the evidence from the panel put down on the day, collect that, and hopefully can give you some sort of positive feedback on how you performed and how you could improve for any future applications that you put in for. It can be quite a daunting experience going through a public appointment process from start to finish, but I get feedback from many folk who have been appointed. It is worthwhile in the end, particularly if you have a interest and a passion for the subject matter that you're applying for. Many people apply for public appointments because they want to be on a board. Many others apply because they have a particular passion for the subject matter for that body deals with. And that passion comes over perhaps in their application form and perhaps interview. So if you are passionate about housing or homelessness or whatever, then this would be the ideal opportunity. And don't be daunted by the process. It is just the same as any other recruitment process with a few things added on, but it's a recruitment process as probably along the lines of any others you've gone through. It is very structured and it's very formal, and you would expect that given it's a government department running it on behalf of ministers. But please don't be put off by anything you have. If you've any questions, contact those that have been listed in the papers. We're happy to answer them. Generally, most come in by email and we answer them that day. And if we can't, then we take it away and find out what we need to, or alternatively, it may be the body that's best placed to answer any questions you have. I'll cover some of the rest of it when we get to the tips, but that's ultimately the process. It all ends up with a news release being issued on the public appointments website setting out who's been appointed, from when, the length of term, the remuneration, and details of any other ministerial appointments that they hold. All of that is to meet the requirements of the Commissioner's Code. It also informs people that who's got what. Many people look at them, and we do sometimes get press inquiries on maybe some of the more high-profile organisations. I deal with, and part of my role I deal with the ferry appointments, Caledonia Maritime Assets and David McBrain Limited, and you could imagine anything regards ferries. There's always press contact afterwards. I'm not sure if Housing Regulator will have that same level. It may well. So just to make you aware, that does happen at the end, but it's a run-of-the-mill process. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. I've run through of how the appointment process works, and I'll come back a bit later to talk about some tips that you should keep in mind, or you can consider keeping in mind if you decide to apply. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you, Kevin. I'm coming back in now, Michael, if I'm right, to chat just a little bit, and I'm going to keep this section short because we don't want to run out of time. We want to make sure that you've got time to ask questions. So I'm going to chat a little bit about what it's like being the board and what the board does at SHR, and then Kevin's got some best tips for you, and then we can come to your questions. So I'll keep this quite short. But being the board of SHR currently is 9 board members. That is 1 more than we will be. We will be moving to 8. And the reason for that is we've been doing some staggered board recruitment. Because my predecessor had been unwell and she sadly then passed away later, there were in fact 4 board members all appointed at the same time, including me as chair. So on a board of 8, half the board was new, 3 non-execs plus a new chair. And that was just circumstances there. And we didn't want to have that cliff edge. And so we've been doing some pre-planning. And as part of that pre-planning, we moved up from having 1 tenant on the board to having 2. They're great. One of the 4 who joined at the same time as me stepped down early due to his retirement. He was going off traveling, and we replaced him then in order to stagger it. And this time there are 3 people stepping down, myself as chair, the deputy chair, although we just replaced him for continuity with a new deputy chair, so that whoever the new incoming chair is has a buddy, if you like, to go to and work with. And that person's quite experienced. And the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee was also stepping down. So again, we've replaced her internally in that role. So 3 of us stepping down, but there's only 2 appointments planned. And so that's why we'll go from 9 board members to 8, and that's the staggering process that I've flagged to you, so that we don't end up with half the board all changing at once. Do you know, we managed that? It was fine. There were worries you might end up with 2 boards, the new folk and the existing folk. I'm really pleased to report that didn't happen. It's a good team of people, and the existing board, if any of you were coming through the appointments process, you'd find it's a really good group of people, quite diverse in terms of background and thought process, diverse in terms of where they come from in Scotland, and we're lucky that we have some super ethnic diversity as well, so really quite a diverse board, and we have a good gender mix as well. So what does the board do? Well, they meet typically bi-monthly, so formal board meetings are 6 times a year, but in addition to that, we'll have things like strategy days and development days for that, which are usually 2 or 3 a year. And we've been aiming in recent times, it was stopped by COVID, of course, but in recent times to have a kind of all SHR event once a year, which we usually tag on to a board session. So the board session might be in the morning and the all SHR session in the afternoon, where every staff member comes and we're all together. So that's the rough outline of what the board's doing. Those meetings typically last from 10:30, depending on the day, until early afternoon. We alternate them between in-face meetings at our office in Glasgow, which is in High Street, a hop and a skip from Queen Street Station, actually. It's a 10-minute walk from Queen Street, so easy to get by public transport from there or Buchanan Street bus station. And we alternate those face-to-face in our office with pretty decent facilities now, or on Teams. And the reason we do that, we've had the debate, should we go back to everything face-to-face? And the reason we haven't is because we've got people who are coming from different parts of Scotland, as you might expect, and who knows what this round will result in. So we have people travelling from Aberdeen, people travelling from quite far into the borders, and so we decided we would keep that mix. But our strategy and development days are always face-to-face. Although any meeting, we will try our best to have a facility for someone to dial in and conference call in if things happen, right? And someone just can't make a face-to-face day. So we try and do that. At those meetings, we're covering a whole range of things. And to give you an idea, actually, I'm just going to open it, give you an idea. We have a board meeting next week, and I'll give you a wee idea of what's on agenda, because it's not a secret squirrel thing, but to give you an idea of the range of things that we'll be speaking about. Next week's actually a Teams meeting, and then a one after that will be face-to-face. But as well as all the usual formalities that board have, so minutes and conflicts of interest and all these things, we'll be hearing we always have a report from the Chief Executive, which is an update on what's been going on and any key issues. Occasionally, they will seek a decision on something from the Chief Executive, but this time there isn't anything for that. The Chief Executive's report's usually about giving the board assurance on the work we're doing. Next week, we'll be looking at our regulatory engagement and serious casework. We'll be looking at a report on that, so that the board is cited on any serious casework that's going on and how that's progressing. And again, there's no decisions made from that. To be clear, the board does not make regulatory decisions. That's entirely for the executive. So if there's ever any move towards intervening in a landlord, even going as far as statutory action, those decisions are made at executive level, not with the board. But the board, of course, wants oversight and wants to understand that the processes that we're using are right and proper, are in line with our framework, and are proportionate to the challenges that were there. So we'll be seeing that report next week on key casework. We're then looking at a lessons learned report, and I won't say what that's on, because it was a case where we did intervene recently with a local authority. And whenever we have a different kind of intervention, and this one's quite different, in fact related to a gypsy traveller site, and we intervened and we found the local authority in quite serious breach, actually. And so we have a lesson learned from that, because that's a different case, that's an unusual one. And so the team have gone through and looked at, did we do everything as we wanted? Is there anything we could have done better, faster, differently? So we always would have a lessons learned. And indeed, we do the same thing if there's ever a statutory intervention, we would have a lessons learned review of that too. So that's coming up next week. Then we're doing something that's a set piece. We're starting with the draft outline of our annual report. And we usually have 3 bites of that cherry, so that we're not just seeing an annual report and agreeing it as a board, but we have an initial discussion, which is the outline. That's the one we're having next week. Roughly the structure we'll use, roughly the kind of headline content. We'll then have another go at that in the following meeting, where we'll look at the detailed text for that. And then there'll be a final goal before the annual report goes live in summer, and after our audit, of course, is completed at the end of the year, when we will sign off the annual report. And that might sound a little cumbersome, but it's just to make sure that you're not debating ifs, and buts in the language in an annual report in a one-off meeting to agree it at the end. We have 3 bites. The time we'll spend on that next week will be quite quick and straightforward, actually. And then there'll be a little more time at the next meeting, because we'll be looking at actual text. And then the sign-off usually goes pretty swimmingly, because we've had 2 bites of the cherry. So there you go, we're starting that next week. We'll have a budget update. We'll have a Q3 performance update, and that's the performance of us as an organisation. How are we performing against our KPIs, our metrics we've set ourselves? How are we performing against our regulator? And we'll also have the outcome of our people survey. There's a big people survey done across the civil service, and we take part in that. Not every organisation does, but we do. We take part every year. And we also do a board survey every year. Or currently we have, under my leadership anyway, to survey the staff on the board and board engagement and the direction. And we'll be reviewing the outcomes of those surveys next week as well. And then we'll go on to an agenda planner. and look at the future agenda. We plan our agendas a year ahead. I don't mean every single meeting's planned in detail, every item, but there's key set piece items that we have, and they're all mapped out so that we don't miss something that's really important. And so the board all have a chance to input to the agendas and so on. And then finally, and this is something we now do at every board meeting, and I am going to say this with a smile, but the new chair will inherit this and will choose if they continue or not. And that is that we have an external speaker who joins us at every single board meeting, because we want to get external insights, and that might be from within the sector. At the last board meeting, it was an organisation called Tenants Together, which is the leading tenants organisation. We had the SFHA, the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, recently. This time we had our guest speaker, and this isn't secret, it'll be on our website, so I'm happy to tell you, it will be the Auditor General for Scotland, Stephen Boyle, because he clearly has oversight of things that relate to housing, and in particular to local authorities, which is in our purview. So that gives you an idea. That's a little snapshot. I thought I'd take a real board meeting and just tell you what's on the agenda to give you a snapshot of the kind of things that we deal with. So I hope that's given you a flavour, and I will stop there.
Thank you.
Back pass over to Kevin, for a few top tips now. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just a few things. I'll reiterate the one I said earlier. Please don't leave it to 10 minutes before to apply. Apply in plenty of time, and make sure that you're happy with everything. You're not doing it in a rush. Another tip, read all the applicant information that we sent out carefully, and make sure you're clear on what evidence that you've been asked to submit. There's no tricks. Don't ask trick questions. The applicant pack is very clear on what evidence you need to provide at the applicant stage. We don't test all of the criteria at the application stage, or very rarely. So it's some parts of the criteria will be tested at evidence, and then if you're invited to interview, then they will test everything. They retest the evidence they tested at the application stage, and they will also test the parts of the evidence, the parts of the criteria that weren't tested at the application stage. So please take care to read carefully what you've been asked to do, and to provide what you've been asked to provide. As I said, it's no tricks, no hidden agendas, just clearly provide the evidence you've been asked to provide. There's always word limits set for evidence. Please try to stick to them as best you can. Panels do have they can discount evidence if it goes well beyond the level set. In this case, I think it's 300 words for each of the different criterion and a one-page career life history. If somebody submits 320 words, 325 words, then that would be fine. But if somebody submits 600 words, then clearly they're gaining an advantage over anybody else who's stuck to the 300 word limit. So that person that submitted 600 words, the panel may take a decision to discount the second part of that application. They might only take the first 300 words and only base a decision on that. So the word limit is there for a reason. So please stick as closely to it as you can. When you apply now, you'll find that Scottish Government is now using an Oracle system for all appointment rounds. It's part of the, if you apply to Scottish Government for a job or internally for promotion, well, if you're applying for an appointment round, it's going through the same system. If you've applied previously for other appointments, you will have probably submitted a Word document or a PDF that we've sent out with all your evidence in it, with your name and details, and probably asked to fill in a diversity forum. It's different now. Everything is done online. So please, again, another reason for starting early, make sure you go in, look at the system, make sure you understand what you've been asked to submit. As I said, we no longer accept Word documents or PDFs as we used to. Everything is done online. So please make sure you understand what's been asked of you, and do it in plenty of time. There is a part on it where there has been an issue. We've only started using Oracle since last October, and there was an issue over the word count for some documents. Not when we tried to download it from Oracle onto our own system to then circulate the information to the panel, there was an issue around some, not all, the word count. And it not downloading all of the evidence submitted. So when you do the career life history, you'll be asked to follow a certain process, and it's in the pack, so that you can upload it as a document as opposed to copying and pasting the information in. So be careful when you read that to make sure you understand what that means. Also, another thing, it's not a great thing with Oracle, but we don't have, it's what the system is. Once you have submitted the evidence and any supporting documents like the career history, you can no longer get the chance to see them. So please make sure you keep a copy of anything you're submitting so that you can refer to it in the event that you're invited to interview. It's something that we weren't particularly happy with, but it's part of the system. So keep copies of whatever you have submitted so that you can refer back to it if you're invited to interview. If you are invited to interview, it's very similar to the application stage. There's no trick questions. We don't try to catch you out. If you're asked a question and you're being asked to submit evidence, then answer it clearly and honestly as you can. There's nothing hidden. We don't want you to try and think or be too clever and think of something else. You will get some candidates who will think, well, they've asked me that, but actually what they really want to know is that. Well, actually, we don't. We want to know what we asked you. So in some occasions, you'll be asked to provide examples of what you've done in your career or your life, which demonstrate the criterion that's been tested. So another tip is in advance of it, and you can do this for the application stage as well, think of examples that demonstrate your ability in the best light possible. Now, you're in a competition with many other people, so you need to demonstrate that your skill, knowledge, experience is as good or stronger than other applicants. So find an example which demonstrate clearly your role in whatever example it was, what you did, how you did it, why you did it, what role you played in, if it's an example within a team. What did you learn about yourself in that example? What would you have done differently if you had the chance to deal with that example again? There is a tendency for many people to talk about we all the time. We did this, we did that. If it's a team, then say we. But if it's actually you that did it within a team, say I. You may find it amazing. A number of applicants, candidates who continually, when they're responding, say, we did this, we did that. If you did it, tell us you did it. It's not being big-headed. It's not showing off. It's being saying clearly and honestly what it was, and within that example. And also, there's always something wrong about describing an example that maybe didn't go perfectly well, particularly if you were well aware why it didn't perfectly well, and you can then explain to the panel what you could have done differently and how you analyse what had gone wrong. It really all depends on the individual criterion you're trying to provide evidence for. But think carefully about what's the one that best demonstrates your experience or your skill or your knowledge, whatever it is you're being asked to demonstrate. The panel will give you every opportunity to set out your evidence. And in fact, if you're going down the wrong route, which sometimes happens, you go down a wee down the wrong route, panels will say, sorry, no, you've picked us up wrong, you've not understood my question, or maybe the panel member didn't maybe set it out clearly enough, and they'll ask you to start again and go back a bit. Don't panic by that. It's better that the panel does that and you get the chance to provide evidence that they really want, as opposed to going down a route which actually isn't doing you any good. So don't panic if that happens. The panel will only be doing it to get the best out of you. And also when you're providing examples and evidence of examples, just don't tell a story. Just don't go from start to finish. This is what happened. And it can be hugely interesting, it can be hugely powerful, but if it doesn't talk about what you did or how you did it or why you did it, then it's not demonstrating really what the panel want to see. That's the main tips. There'll be others I could think of, but that's the main things. It's about having good examples, thinking about them clearly before you apply, and then again, if you're invited to interview, I suppose trying to make the best. It can be stressful, as I said earlier, but enjoy it and try and make the best of it and learn from it. You might not be successful at the end, but you could maybe take a huge amount of learning from that experience for the next time you apply. And if you get feedback, hopefully we would cover that. And if you're not successful first time, try again. We have lots of applicants who are first time applicants who get through, and there are others who maybe tried 2 or 3 times before they got through. And each time they've been unsuccessful, they've learned something, which they've then put to good use next time round, whether that's how you set out your evidence in application or it's how you respond to questions at interview. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kevin and George. Hopefully that's been really helpful for people. I'm just going to stop the recording now. There, okay.